Tonight, the NBA world is in shock. A rising star who once represented everything hopeful about modern basketball, gone at just 29 years old. The basketball community woke up to devastating news as the Memphis Grizzlies confirmed the death of Brandon Clarke, a player known not only for explosive athleticism and relentless energy on the court, but for a reputation teammates repeatedly described as humble, kind, and deeply respected inside the locker room. And tonight, millions of fans across America are asking the same painful questions. What exactly happened? Why did this happen so suddenly? And how does a player who once looked destined to become one of the NBA's most beloved role stars end up at the center of a tragedy that has now shaken the entire league? Because this story is bigger than basketball. It's about pressure. It's about injuries. It's about mental strain, public scrutiny, private battles, and the brutal reality that fame and success do not protect anyone from personal darkness. According to multiple reports, authorities are still investigating the circumstances surrounding Clarke's death. Some outlets have reported that investigators are examining the possibility of an overdose, though officials have not publicly confirmed a final cause of death. And as tributes pour in from teammates, coaches, fans, and NBA stars around the world, one thing is becoming painfully clear. This loss feels personal. Not just to Memphis, not just to basketball fans, but to an entire generation of sports fans who watched Brandon Clarke fight through devastating injuries, career setbacks, and enormous expectations while somehow still carrying himself with positivity and grace. Tonight, we're going deep into the full story. The rise of Brandon Clarke. The promise. The injuries. The controversies. The final weeks before his death. The emotional reactions flooding social media. And the difficult conversation this tragedy is now forcing the sports world to confront. Because behind every jersey number, there is still a human being. And tonight, the NBA is mourning one of its OWN. To understand why the death of Brandon Clarke is hitting the basketball world so hard, you have to understand the kind of player and person he was. Brandon Clarke was never supposed to become an NBA success story. He wasn't the most hyped recruit in America. He wasn't projected as a generational superstar coming out of high school. He didn't enter the league with the celebrity status of a LeBron James or a Zion Williamson. Instead, Clarke built his reputation the hard way, through relentless effort, discipline, and an underdog mentality that fans in Memphis immediately connected with. Born in Vancouver, Canada, Clarke later moved to Arizona and developed into an athletic forward with extraordinary explosiveness, defensive instincts, and energy. Long before NBA fame, coaches and teammates described him as intensely competitive, but unusually humble for a player with elite athletic gifts. That combination would define nearly every stage of his career. He first played college basketball at San Jose State before transferring to Gonzaga University, where his national profile exploded during the 2018 to 2019 season. At Gonzaga, Clarke became one of the most exciting two-way players in college basketball. He blocked shots at an elite level. He finished above the rim with highlight reel dunks. He defended multiple positions. And most importantly, he played with non-stop intensity that made him impossible to ignore. NBA scouts loved his motor. Analysts loved his efficiency. Fans loved his energy. But even then, there were questions. Was he too undersized to dominate in the NBA? Could his offensive game translate to the professional level? Would injuries become an issue because of his hyper-athletic style? Those questions followed him into the 2019 NBA draft. Selected 21st overall by the Oklahoma City Thunder before being traded on draft night to the Memphis Grizzlies, Clarke entered a franchise that was itself in transition. The Grizzlies were building around young stars like Ja Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr., trying to create a new era after the famed grit and grind years. And almost immediately, Brandon Clarke became one of the most important pieces of that rebuild. During his rookie season, Clarke averaged more than 12 points and nearly 6 rebounds per game while shooting at remarkable efficiency. His athleticism made him a nightmare in transition. His hustle plays energized crowds. His chemistry with Ja Morant became one of the most entertaining young combinations in basketball. He earned NBA All-Rookie First-Team honors in 2020. But what really made Clarke beloved in Memphis wasn't just statistics. It was the way he played. Every possession looked personal. Loose balls, put-back dunks, chase-down blocks. The kind of effort fans immediately recognize as authentic. In a league sometimes criticized for load management and superstar ego, Brandon Clarke felt refreshingly genuine. Teammates repeatedly described him as selfless. Coaches praised his professionalism. Fans embraced him as one of the emotional engines of the team. And in Memphis, a city that values toughness and authenticity, that mattered. But as often happens in professional sports, the dream slowly became more complicated. Because behind the highlights, Clarke's body was beginning to betray him. Injuries would become the defining challenge of his career. And eventually, according to many observers, perhaps the defining emotional struggle of his life. In March of 2023, Clarke suffered a devastating Achilles tear, one of the most feared injuries in basketball. For explosive athletes whose games rely heavily on speed and jumping ability, Achilles injuries can permanently alter careers. And for Brandon Clarke, the timing could not have been worse. At that point, the Grizzlies looked like one of the NBA's most promising young contenders. Morant was becoming a superstar. The team had championship aspirations. And Clarke had become a critical part of their rotation. Then suddenly, everything changed. Recovery was long, painful, mentally exhausting. Athletes often describe serious injuries as emotionally isolating experiences. The cameras disappear. The crowd noise disappears. The daily adrenaline of competition disappears. What remains is rehab, uncertainty, and fear. Fear that you may never be the same player again. Fear that your career peak may already be over. Fear that the league may move on without you. Clarke fought to come back. And to his credit, he did return to the court. But many fans and analysts believed he was never quite the same physically after the Achilles injury. His explosiveness appeared diminished. Additional knee and calf issues continued to limit his availability. During the 2025 to 2026 season, injuries restricted him to just a handful of appearances. Still, publicly, Clarke remained positive. That's what makes this story emotionally difficult for so many people. Because outwardly, he still appeared hopeful. He still smiled during interviews. He still supported teammates from the bench. He still engaged with the community. Reports highlighted his charity work in Memphis, including school donations and youth outreach efforts. To fans, Brandon Clarke looked like someone fighting through adversity with resilience. But over the last several months, troubling signs began emerging. In April 2026, Clarke was reportedly arrested in Arkansas on charges that included possession and trafficking of controlled substances, as well as fleeing law enforcement during a traffic incident. For many fans, the arrest came as a complete shock. This was not the public image people associated with Brandon Clarke. And almost immediately, speculation began spreading online. Was he struggling personally? Were injuries affecting his mental health? Was addiction involved? Had the pressure of rebuilding his career become overwhelming? At the time, there were more questions than answers. And now, after his sudden death at 29, those same questions have returned with even greater intensity. Because in hindsight, many fans are looking back at the last year of his life and wondering whether there were warning signs that people missed. That emotional hindsight is already becoming a huge part of this story. And it's one reason the reaction online has been so overwhelming. For many Americans, this tragedy taps into something larger than sports. It touches a national conversation about mental health, painkiller dependency, athlete isolation, the emotional cost of catastrophic injuries, and the reality that public success can hide private suffering, especially in professional sports, where athletes are expected to perform through pain, maintain public composure, and constantly project confidence even when their lives may be unraveling behind the scenes. The NBA has faced tragedies before. The deaths of players like Kobe Bryant, Malik Sealy, and others left permanent scars across basketball culture. But Brandon Clarke's death feels uniquely haunting to many fans because he was still active, still young, still fighting to reclaim his career, still viewed as someone whose story was unfinished. And now, suddenly, that story is over. At just 29 years old, the official announcement came Tuesday. The Memphis Grizzlies released a statement confirming the death of Brandon Clarke, sending shockwaves across the sports world. "We are heartbroken by the tragic loss of Brandon Clarke," the organization said. Brandon was an outstanding teammate and an even better person whose impact on the organization and the greater Memphis community will not be forgotten. Almost immediately, tributes began flooding social media. The NBA itself released a statement from Commissioner Adam Silver, who described Clarke as a beloved teammate and leader who played the game with enormous passion and grit. His agency, Priority Sports, reportedly described him as the gentlest soul and emphasized how deeply loved he was by those who knew him personally. But while the emotional tributes spread rapidly, another reality emerged at the same time: confusion. Because authorities initially released very few details regarding the circumstances surrounding Clarke's death, and in the absence of confirmed information, speculation exploded online. Multiple media outlets reported that emergency responders were called to a residence in the Los Angeles area following a medical emergency. Some reports indicated investigators found drug paraphernalia at the scene, though officials have not publicly confirmed a final cause of death. That distinction is critically important. At this moment, no official autopsy conclusion has been publicly announced. No definitive cause of death has been confirmed by authorities. And responsible reporting requires acknowledging that clearly. Still, the reports were enough to intensify public attention dramatically, because suddenly, this was no longer simply a tragic sports death story. It became part of a larger national conversation surrounding addiction, athlete wellness, and the hidden emotional costs of professional sports, particularly because of Clarke's recent legal troubles. According to earlier reports, Clarke had been arrested just weeks before his death on allegations involving controlled substances and fleeing police during a traffic stop. That revelation changed how many people viewed the timeline leading up to this tragedy. Online discussions quickly turned emotional and divided. Some argued the public should avoid speculation until all facts are confirmed. Networks, podcasts, sports radio shows, and social media creators are all revisiting Clarke's journey, not just as a basketball player, but as a person. Highlight reels are circulating again. His dunks, his blocks, his celebrations. Moments where teammates embraced him after huge plays. Moments where he smiled on the bench. Moments that now feel haunting in retrospect. Because death changes how people watch old footage. Suddenly, every clip feels heavier. Every smile feels fragile. Every highlight becomes part of a memory archive instead of a continuing story. And that emotional shift is exactly why this tragedy has resonated so deeply across America. This isn't just sports news anymore. It's become a reminder of human vulnerability, of how quickly life can change, of how even famous athletes can silently struggle, and of how often society notices warning signs only after it's too late. From a basketball perspective, Brandon Clarke's death represents one of the most shocking losses the NBA has experienced in years. Not simply because of his age, but because active player deaths remain extraordinarily rare in modern professional basketball. That reality alone explains why the emotional reaction has been so intense across sports media. But analysts say this tragedy may also force uncomfortable conversations inside the league itself. Because Brandon Clarke's story intersects with several major issues already being debated across professional sports: injury recovery, mental health, substance abuse, public pressure, athlete identity loss, and the psychological toll of career instability. Sports psychologists have long warned that catastrophic injuries can trigger severe emotional consequences for professional athletes. When a player suffers a major Achilles tear, especially one whose game depends heavily on explosiveness, the emotional impact can be devastating. Athletes often spend their entire lives building identity around performance, around movement, around physical dominance. Then suddenly, after injury, everything changes. Recovery can involve isolation, chronic pain, depression, anxiety, fear, and uncertainty about the future. And unlike normal workers, professional athletes experience those struggles publicly. Millions of people watch. Millions criticize. Millions speculate. One bad performance becomes national conversation. One setback becomes headline news. That pressure can become psychologically overwhelming, especially for players fighting to regain former levels of performance. Former athletes across multiple sports have openly discussed dependency on painkillers during injury recoveries. The NFL, MLB, NHL, and NBA have all faced scrutiny regarding how injured athletes manage physical pain and emotional distress. And while there is currently no confirmed evidence directly linking Brandon Clarke's death to substance abuse, reports surrounding the ongoing investigation have intensified those conversations dramatically. Legally, investigators will likely proceed carefully. Authorities typically avoid releasing premature conclusions in high-profile deaths until toxicology and autopsy findings are finalized. That process can take weeks, possibly longer, which means speculation online may continue growing in the meantime. And experts warn that social media environments often become dangerous during situations like this. Unverified rumors spread rapidly. False claims gain traction. And grieving families can become secondary victims of internet speculation. That's why many journalists are emphasizing caution. Because at the center of this story is still a grieving family, a grieving team, and grieving friends. From a league standpoint, the NBA now faces renewed pressure regarding player wellness systems. In recent years, the league has publicly emphasized mental health initiatives. Teams now employ mental health professionals. Players have become more open discussing anxiety, depression, and emotional struggles. Stars like Kevin Love and DeMar DeRozan helped normalize mental health discussions among professional athletes, but critics argue stigma still exists, especially around substance abuse, especially among male athletes, especially within hyper-competitive sports cultures where vulnerability can be perceived as weakness. And that cultural reality may become a major conversation point in the weeks ahead. Financially, Clarke's death also impacts the Grizzlies organization emotionally and structurally. He had become one of the franchise's longest-tenured players, a locker room stabilizer, a culture player, someone coaches trusted. Those types of players often matter far more internally than casual fans realize. Even players who aren't all-stars can become emotionally central to team chemistry. That's part of why teammates appear devastated. This wasn't just a coworker. For many of them, Brandon Clarke was part of daily life for years. Flights, practices, road trips, playoff battles, private conversations, shared struggles. Professional sports teams often function like families under extreme pressure, and now that family is grieving publicly. Media analysts are also examining how the public narrative surrounding Clarke shifted over time. Early in his career, he was viewed almost universally as an uplifting success story. Then injuries complicated the narrative. Then legal troubles changed public perception again. And now, after his death, many fans are reconsidering how quickly public opinion can shift regarding athletes. One arrest can suddenly overshadow years of positive reputation. One controversy can redefine headlines. And yet, after tragedy, people often rediscover the humanity behind those headlines. That emotional whiplash is visible all over social media right now.